Tessa, I've given everything to your brother. For a brief second, I thought I'd misheard him. The words felt alien, as if they belonged in someone else's nightmare, not mine. I clenched my phone, the sting of betrayal cutting deeper than I could have imagined. My father's voice was calm, too calm, as if he wasn't demolishing everything I dedicated my life to in a single breath, as if 2 decades of my sacrifices and devotion meant absolutely nothing. I forced down the lump rising in my throat. The view beyond my office window blurred into a haze as my thoughts raced. The empire we had painstakingly built together, the one I had given up everything to nurture, was no longer mine. For years, I had believed I was the backbone of Mitchell Enterprises, that my father saw me as an equal, the one to carry forward our legacy. I was wrong. Thanks for letting me know, I said, my voice eerily steady. There was a pause. My father hadn't expected that. He'd probably thought I'd scream, plead, maybe even beg. But I gave him nothing. Tessa, I know this seems unfair. I ended the call. The silence in my office was suffocating, the weight of what had just happened bearing down on me harder than anything I had faced before. But then, something shifted. I inhaled slowly, deliberately, grounding the fire building inside me. If he thought this was the end, he was sorely mistaken. Mitchell Enterprises wasn't just a business. It was a vision we'd shared. It was my life's work. I'd been there since the very beginning, side by side with my father, clawing our way up from nothing. At 19, I officially joined the company. My father had the big dreams, sure, but I was the one who made them real. I had built our investment strategies, expanded the portfolio, and saved us from collapse more times than I could count. Yet, over the past year, I'd noticed a shift. My father had started to shut me out of key meetings. Financial reports stopped landing on my desk. Decisions were being made behind closed doors. By Liam. Liam, the golden boy, the son my father always wanted. While I had spent my 20s grinding in boardrooms and meeting investors, Liam was busy in nightclubs, burning through trust fund cash like it was never ending. He didn't care about the business, never had. And yet, somehow, my father had handed everything over to him. I should have seen it coming. The missing reports, the whispered conversations, the sudden interest Liam took in the company after years of coasting. I'd been too trusting, too focused on running the business to notice the floor shifting beneath me. And now they thought they had taken it all. I stared at the mahogany desk in front of me, my fingers tapping a steady rhythm against its surface. My mind raced, flipping through contracts, legal frameworks, and the backup plans I had quietly kept. What they didn't know, what they would soon find out, was that I never played this game blindly. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a black notebook. The real records, kept separate from the official files. Every major decision, every hidden liability, every backroom deal my father had made. If they thought they could push me out and walk away unscathed, they had severely underestimated me. I had poured my heart into building this company. I knew every weakness, every pressure point, and I wasn't going down without a fight. Leaning back in my chair, I stared out at the city skyline. My father's second mistake was assuming I would crumble. But I wasn't broken. I was preparing for war. With one last glance at my phone, I stood up, adjusted the sleeves of my blazer, and walked out of the office. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. I left the office early that day. Not because I was defeated, but because I needed space to think. The truth was, I had already sensed this coming. As I drove through the streets of Austin, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened, the familiar city felt different, colder, more distant, more. My father had cut me out. Liam had won. Or so they thought. I pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and sat there for a while, letting the stillness wrap around me. The house felt hollow, because it was. I had spent so many years tied to Mitchell Enterprises, pouring everything into the business, that I'd never taken the time to build a life outside of it. While my friends were getting married, raising families, and taking vacations, I was clocking 16-hour days to ensure the company didn't collapse under the weight of my father's outdated strategies. And now I had nothing to show for it. Or at least, that's what they wanted me to believe. I stepped inside, tossing my keys onto the counter, and made my way to the study. The shelves were lined with books on business, leadership, and negotiation, the very subjects I had built my life around. But tonight, they seemed hollow, meaningless. Instead, I reached for the one thing that had never failed me: my notebook. I flipped it open, scanning the pages filled with years of meticulous notes, hidden accounts, questionable deals, every misstep my father thought no one had noticed. But I had noticed. I had always noticed. My father's greatest lesson to me, whether he realized it or not, was that real power didn't belong to the one with the biggest empire. It belonged to the one who knew exactly how to burn it all down. I thought back to my childhood, to all the lessons he had drilled into me about loyalty, family, grit, perseverance. How he had made it clear that nothing was handed to you, that you had to earn your place in this world. And yet, when it mattered most, he had handed everything to Liam, the one who had never lifted a finger to deserve it. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect. And my father had made a critical mistake. He had underestimated me. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed: Ethan Carter, my father's oldest friend, the man who had helped secure the very first round of funding for Mitchell Enterprises, back when it was just an idea on a bar napkin. Ethan had always believed in me, maybe more than my own father ever did. I tapped call. "Tessa," he answered almost immediately, his voice warm but tinged with caution. "It's been a while." "I need to meet," I said, cutting straight to the point. "It's about my father." There was a pause, then a soft sigh. "I figured something was going on. Meet me at the club in an hour." I hung up and grabbed my keys. If my father wanted to rewrite the rules, so be it. I'd just play a different game. The private club looked exactly the same as I remembered: leather chairs, polished wood, and an air of old money. It was a place where men like my father and Ethan had built their empires, where deals were sealed over aged whiskey and quiet conversations. Ethan was sitting in the back, a glass of scotch in hand, his expression as sharp and calculating as ever. When he saw me, he gave a slow nod, swirling his drink lazily. "So," he said, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth, "tell me what's going on." I didn't sugarcoat it. I laid it all out: the call, the betrayal, the way my father had handed Liam the keys to an empire he didn't deserve. Ethan listened, his face unreadable, occasionally nodding as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned back, letting out a long breath. "And what exactly do you want from me?" I didn't hesitate. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "I want to build something better, and I want my father and Liam to realize exactly what they lost when they pushed me out." Ethan studied me for a moment, the corners of his mouth twitching into a small, amused smile. "Your father always said you had my ruthlessness. Then you know I'm not going to lose." He nodded slowly as if weighing his options. "All right, Tessa, tell me your plan." I took a breath, steadying the fire in my chest. This was it, the beginning of my war. My father and Liam think they're in control, but they've been reckless. They're throwing money into acquisitions they don't understand, hoping they can outpace the market. But they don't have the infrastructure to sustain that kind of growth. Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "How do you know that?" "Because I built the infrastructure," I replied, voice firm. "I know exactly where the cracks are, and if those cracks widen, the whole thing comes crashing down." Ethan let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "So you don't plan to attack them directly? You're going to let them implode on their own?" Exactly. Mitchell Enterprises had been pouring capital into real estate, logistics, and manufacturing, industries they didn't understand. My father and Liam were gambling on blind ambition, believing the name Mitchell alone could guarantee success. It couldn't, and it wouldn't. Ethan's eyes sparkled with interest. "And when they start to stumble?" "That's when I make my move." This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about proving I wasn't just a pawn they could discard. I wanted them to see that cutting me out had been the worst decision they'd ever made. "I'm starting my own firm," I said. "Lean, strategic, focused on acquisitions that make sense, not just flashy headlines. And I plan to bring the best people from Mitchell Enterprises with me." Ethan let out a low whistle. "You're serious?" I met his gaze without flinching. Dead serious. I had spent years mentoring and leading the sharpest minds at Mitchell Enterprises. They trusted me. They didn't respect Liam, and I knew where their loyalty lay. Ethan leaned forward, his interest piqued. I take it you already have names? I slid my phone across the table. On the screen was a list: top executives, project leads, analysts, the backbone of the company. These are the people who actually run Mitchell Enterprises, I said. And I'm betting half of them will walk if I offer them a better future. Ethan let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head in admiration. You really don't waste time, do you? I can't afford to. Ethan sat back, weighing everything. After a pause, he nodded slowly. All right, Tessa, I'm in. Those 3 words were all I needed. Within a week, I had secured initial funding. Ethan opened doors to investors eager to back a competitor to Mitchell Enterprises, especially one that knew exactly where the vulnerabilities were. The first call I made was to Danielle Carter, the head of risk management. She had been my mentor for years, someone who knew how much of the company I had quietly built. Tessa, she answered on the first ring. Her voice was tight, a mix of shock and concern. I heard what happened. It's absolutely... I'm starting something new, I told her, and I want you with me. There was a moment of silence. Then her voice came, steady and sure. Tell me where to sign. One by one, the pieces started falling into place. By the end of the week, I had 4 key team members. By the end of the month, I had 10. And the best part? My father and Liam had no idea. They thought I had disappeared. They were wrong. I sat in my new office, the incorporation papers for my firm laid out neatly before me, a symbol of everything I had worked for. Mitchell Enterprises had taken so much from me, but I had built something stronger, something they couldn't see coming. I stared at my father's name and my phone contacts for a long moment, considering whether to call and let him know what I was about to do. But then, I smiled to myself and placed the phone back down. He'd find out soon enough. The first domino had fallen, and over the next few weeks, the momentum I had built became a force neither my father nor Liam could stop. People started leaving Mitchell Enterprises. Some slipped away quietly. Others departed in a blaze of frustration. But they all had the same destination: my new firm. I didn't have to poach them aggressively. They came willingly, drawn by the chance to work in a place that valued them, away from Liam's chaotic leadership. I knew exactly who felt overlooked, who was tired of Liam's incompetence, who was ready to jump ship before the whole thing went under. And I gave them an option. The unraveling of Mitchell Enterprises wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. The first major hit came in the form of a botched acquisition deal. For months, Mitchell Enterprises had been in talks to buy Harlan Tech, a mid-sized logistics company that would have expanded their supply chain reach. I had been the one who originally initiated those negotiations, until I was pushed out. Liam took over the deal and it backfired spectacularly. The headlines hit first: Mitchell Enterprises fumbles acquisition as CEO's son fails to secure Harlan Tech. The press tore into them, highlighting leadership issues and lack of experience. Harlan Tech, spooked by Liam's mismanagement, pulled out and went with a different firm, one I had quietly advised behind the scenes. It wasn't enough to destroy Mitchell Enterprises yet, but it was the first public crack in their image, the beginning of the downfall. 2 days after the Harlan Tech disaster, I got the call I had been expecting. My phone buzzed as I reviewed my firm's expansion plans. I let it ring until just before voicemail, then answered. Tessa. My father's voice was tense, tightly controlled, but the strain was unmistakable. I assume you've seen the news? I leaned back in my chair, a faint smile tugging at my lips. I have. A pause. Did you have something to do with this? I exhaled softly, letting the silence stretch. Dad, I said at last, my tone smooth as silk, you made it very clear I was out. Why would I have anything to do with Mitchell Enterprises? He sighed, the weight of the situation heavy in that breath. We need to talk. There it was, the first crack in his pride, the first hint of regret. But I wasn't ready to talk, not yet. I'm busy, I said, voice crisp. You'll have to find another time. Before he could respond, I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I was the one walking away from him. I wasn't the only one savoring the fallout. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Danielle Carter, my former mentor, now one of my most trusted allies. Danielle, Liam's losing it. He called an emergency meeting today, blamed internal sabotage. People are starting to question if he's capable of running the company. I smirked. Of course, Liam was panicking. He had never been able to handle pressure, and now with the press circling, investors growing wary, and key employees deserting him, he was in over his head. And I wasn't finished yet. This wasn't just about Liam. It wasn't even just about my father. It was about dismantling the entire myth of Mitchell Enterprises, the legend they had built, brick by brick, that Mitchells never fail. That illusion was shattering, and I was watching it crumble piece by piece. I made my next move. I picked up the phone and dialed Ethan. When he answered, I didn't waste time. "It's time." "You're sure?" he asked, though I could already hear the anticipation in his voice. "Liam's floundering. My father's starting to doubt him. The board is restless, and the investors are losing confidence. If we act now, we can lock down some of Mitchell's biggest contracts before they even know what hit them." Ethan let out a low, appreciative chuckle. "You really are ruthless, Tessa." I smiled, cold, calculating. I learned from the best. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait. The next phase was straightforward. Deepen the fractures at Mitchell Enterprises, quietly secure key contracts, and let my father realize, too late, what he had done by turning his back on me. For years, I had been the quiet force behind Mitchell's success, the loyal daughter, the silent strategist. No more. Now I was the architect of their undoing. Liam was flailing. I observed from a distance as the once mighty Mitchell Enterprises started to buckle under the weight of his incompetence. It began with minor issues, missed deadlines, disappointing quarterly reports. But soon, the cracks widened into gaping fissures, and I was there to make sure they did. After the Harlan Tech fiasco, Mitchell Enterprises lost more than just a deal. They lost credibility. Investors weren't just concerned anymore, they were scared. Then came the departures. At first, it was a slow trickle. Executives I had personally recruited to my new firm. But soon, the exodus became impossible to ignore. Key managers, project leads, and top talent started walking out the door. Clients grew wary. Contracts that had once been considered automatic renewals were suddenly left unsigned. Investors began calling my father directly, demanding answers. The pressure was mounting, and the beauty of it all, I hadn't even needed to lift a finger. Liam was tearing the company apart all on his own. The second call from my father came late at night. I was in my office, reviewing a contract for my firm's latest acquisition, a deal that had once been Mitchell Enterprises' crown jewel. The irony wasn't lost on me. The phone rang, and I let it buzz a few times before picking up. "Dad." This time, his voice wasn't arrogant or commanding. It was something I hadn't heard before: desperation. "Tessa, listen, we need to talk in person." I leaned back in my chair, tapping my nails thoughtfully against the desk. "About what?" There was a pause, followed by a heavy sigh. "Liam is struggling. The board's getting concerned. There are financial issues that need to be addressed." Financial issues. That was putting it lightly. Mitchell Enterprises was bleeding cash, and I knew exactly why. "And you think I can help?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Tessa, please." His voice softened in a way that almost sounded foreign. "I know you're angry, but you're still part of this family. You've always been the smartest one. We need you." There it was, the admission I'd been waiting for, the acknowledgement that I had always been the one holding everything together. But it was too late. We met in my father's office the next morning. The air in the room was thick, heavy with unspoken tension. Liam was already seated, pale and stiff, his usual cocky smirk nowhere in sight. His eyes darted nervously between my father and me, a man finally realizing the gravity of his mistakes. "Tessa," my father began, his voice tight, "we need to restructure the company. The losses have been significant." I folded my arms, letting the silence stretch. "Define significant." He hesitated, then slid a folder across the desk. I opened it, scanning the numbers: staggering losses, bleeding contracts, collapsing assets. Mitchell Enterprises was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. The empire my father had spent a lifetime building was falling apart in less than a year, all because he had entrusted it to the wrong person. I shut the folder and met his gaze head on. "What do you want from me?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. The weight of pride battled with desperation on his face. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet, almost broken. "I need you to come back. Help us fix this." I could have laughed. I could have stood up, walked out, and left them to drown. But I didn't. I let the silence linger, savored the shift in the room. Liam, the so-called golden child, sat motionless, his arrogance shattered, replaced by a hollow stare. The man who had been handed everything was now reduced to a spectator. "And if I don't?" I asked, keeping my voice cool even. My father exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Then we lose everything." I tapped my nails against the folder, each click a reminder of the power I now held. This was the moment I had been waiting for. They had dismissed me, underestimated me, cast me aside like I was expendable. And now, they were begging for my help. "I'll think about it," I said smoothly, standing. Liam's head snapped up. "Wait, what? Dad, she can't just—" "She can do whatever she wants," my father cut in, his voice flat, resigned. Liam fell silent, the realization finally sinking in. The golden boy had fallen from grace, and there was nothing he could do about it. I turned and walked out without another word, leaving them in the wreckage they had created. I didn't go back to Mitchell Enterprises. I didn't return their calls. I ignored the increasingly desperate emails, the carefully worded letters my father sent, each one more pleading than the last, went unread. While they scrambled to patch the holes in a sinking ship, I was laying the groundwork for my final move. Exactly 1 month after that meeting, the headlines broke. Mitchell Enterprises files for bankruptcy amid leadership crisis. The articles were ruthless, detailing the failed acquisitions, the exodus of talent, the erosion of trust in leadership. Liam's name was plastered across every front page as the face of the company's collapse. But the part that mattered most to me? The section that detailed their remaining assets. Assets that were now being sold off piece by piece. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I sat in a sleek modern conference room, the hum of efficiency around me, a stark contrast to the chaos engulfing Mitchell Enterprises. Lawyers and advisors moved with purpose, finalizing the paperwork that would make it official. My lawyer slid the final contract across the table. "It's done," he said quietly. "Your firm now owns the most valuable divisions of Mitchell Enterprises." I picked up the pen, steady and calm, and signed my name. Just like that, I had taken everything my father built, without him ever seeing it coming. Liam had thought he was playing a game of power. My father thought he was securing his legacy. But they'd both been playing checkers, while I had been playing chess. I hadn't just taken the company. I had taken the clients, the talent, the divisions that actually mattered. The heartbeat of the business. What remained was a hollow shell, a name with no meaning, a legacy with no future. I didn't expect my father to show up, but he did. I was in my office when my assistant knocked. "Ms. Mitchell, your father is here." I looked up from my desk, surprised, but not entirely. I hadn't seen him in weeks. "Send him in." He stepped through the door, and for a moment, I barely recognized him. The man standing before me wasn't the towering figure who had once seemed invincible. He looked older, smaller, a shadow of the man who had built an empire from the ground up. His eyes swept the room, my office, my firm, my success. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost hollow. "You really did it." I did. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unyielding. "You could have come back," he said, voice rough. "We could have fixed it together." I leaned back, the weight of years pressing against me. "No, Dad, you could have fixed it, but you didn't want to. You wanted Liam to be the one. You wanted to prove I wasn't essential." I gestured around the room, the polished furniture, the hum of quiet efficiency, the team outside my office working seamlessly. "Now you see what I always knew. It was never about the name on the building. It was about the people who built it." His jaw tightened like he wanted to argue, but no words came. because he knew I was right. I made a mistake, he finally admitted, voice barely above a whisper. For a brief second, something flickered in me, a small, distant part that still remembered the father I had once admired, the father who taught me to fight, to build, to lead. A part of me wanted to forgive him. But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, every moment I had spent proving myself, only to be told I wasn't enough. So I said nothing. He stood there for another few seconds, waiting for a response, for something that wasn't coming. And then, without another word, he turned and walked out of my office. I didn't look back. I never needed Mitchell Enterprises. I never needed his approval. What I needed was the freedom to build something that was mine. And I had done exactly that. Because power isn't given, it's taken. And in the end, I took everything.